When the sea turns red, there's no warning, only instinct. From luxury dives and research expeditions to kayaks and Coast Guard patrols, these stories expose how fragile safety becomes when the ocean's top predators rise from the deep. Great whites, tiger sharks, and bull sharks strike with terrifying precision, turning curiosity into carnage in seconds. Even the strongest steel and clearest glass can shatter under their power. Beneath the surface, the line between science, sport, and survival disappears. Watch till the end. On November 5, 2025, the early morning sky above Gansbai glowed orange as the Ocean Spirit expedition boat prepared for its deep-water dive. The sea looked calm, its surface smooth as glass, and the crew worked quietly while the sun climbed higher. 3 divers stood at the center of the deck. Dr. Leah Pritchard, a 35-year-old marine biologist known for her calm precision; Ethan Cole, a young travel vlogger with a fearless streak; and Samir Khan, a retired Navy diver searching for peace after years of demanding missions. Each came for different reasons, but all shared the same curiosity: to see the world's most feared predator up close. Leah had spent most of her life studying shark behavior. She believed that understanding their instincts could change how people viewed them, not as monsters, but as vital parts of the ocean's balance. Her research had brought her to Gansbai many times before, but today's dive was special. It was the first trial of the Crystal View cage, a transparent structure built from a new acrylic material, said to withstand the full force of a great white strike. Ethan was there to record the event for his online audience, eager to capture something few ever experienced. Samir, recently divorced and struggling with the silence of civilian life, joined the expedition hoping to rediscover a sense of purpose beneath the waves. The cage glimmered under the sun as crew members secured it to the hoist. Its clear panels reflected the water, almost invisible when lowered into the sea. The divers suited up, their tanks clinking softly as they moved. Once the signals were checked and the cameras were ready, the winch began to lower them into the blue. The surface noise faded away, replaced by the slow rhythm of bubbles and the steady beat of their hearts. Below, the world shifted to a dreamlike calm. Shafts of light filtered through the water, and the shadow of the boat hovered far above. For a few quiet minutes, everything was peaceful. Small fish darted around, and Leah pointed her camera toward a distant silhouette moving with slow power, the first sign of the great white. Its movement was smooth, almost graceful, circling wider with each pass. Ethan's camera followed its motion, capturing every glint of its pale underside. Then the shark came closer. Its size dwarfed the cage, each slow turn deliberate, eyes fixed on the strange, clear structure before it. On the deck above, the crew adjusted the bait line, dropping an extra chunk of fish into the water to draw it nearer. That small action would change everything. The predator's body tensed, its movements sharpening. It swam past once, then turned abruptly, tail slicing through the water. In one burst of speed, it lunged forward. The impact was deafening, the whole cage shaking violently as the shark slammed its snout into the side. A deep crack streaked across the acrylic wall like lightning, spreading in jagged lines. Leah's eyes widened behind her mask as the sound of stress echoed through the water. Tiny bubbles slipped through the fracture, and the cage groaned under the pressure. Then another strike came, harder, faster, more brutal than before. The second strike shattered the damaged panel, sending a surge of bubbles and debris swirling through the cage. The shark forced its massive head through the opening, snapping its jaws with terrifying power. Water flooded in, filling the small space in seconds. Leah reached for the safety bar, but the sudden rush threw her backward, her camera drifting from her grasp. The lights flickered as Ethan's recording gear shorted out, the screen flashing once before dying. Samir tried to steady himself, his training taking over, but the confined space gave him nowhere to move. The great white twisted violently, its tail sweeping across the cage like a wrecking ball. The structure groaned as metal bolts popped free, bending under the relentless motion. Each movement created chaos, blood, bubbles, and noise mixing in a blur of confusion. Leah's oxygen hissed from a broken valve, clouding the water around her. Samir struck the wall, trying to fend off the creature, but the impact only drew its focus. It lunged again, its jaws closing around his arm with crushing force. On the surface, the crew shouted into headsets, their hands fumbling with the winch controls. The crane motor groaned as the heavy frame began to lift. The water below boiled with motion, waves slapping against the hull. A red stain spread across the surface, and then for a moment everything fell silent. When the cage broke through the waves, its clear panels were shattered, the water inside dark and heavy. The divers hung limp in the wreckage, their suits torn, and the structure barely holding shape. Crew members pulled ropes frantically, cutting cables to bring the frame closer, but no movement came from within. The once pristine crystal view cage lay twisted, its promised strength shattered in front of everyone. Rescuers and medical staff arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. The crew stood in stunned silence, staring at the wreckage as the ocean calmed again. Pieces of acrylic floated nearby, glinting under the sunlight like broken glass. The sea that had seemed peaceful hours earlier now looked endless and merciless. News of the tragedy spread rapidly. Reports described how the test of the new cage had turned into one of the deadliest accidents in shark diving history. Experts later determined that the impact of the great white had exceeded all test parameters, and a small design flaw near the lower corner had caused the initial crack to spread faster under pressure. Engineers and marine scientists gathered to analyze every detail, determined to understand how such a failure could occur. Families of the victims arrived in Gansbai days later. They stood at the harbor as local divers placed wreaths in the water, each flower drifting outward with the tide. The community, long familiar with the risks of the sea, mourned quietly. The tragedy became a turning point for marine safety, forcing stricter standards for underwater enclosures and renewed respect for the power of the animals they were built to study. In the end, the ocean returned to silence, holding its secrets beneath the waves. What began as a test of innovation had ended as a reminder that in the wild, no design, no matter how strong, could ever truly control nature's force. On April 7, 2024, the turquoise waters off Fiji shimmered beneath a warm morning sun as wildlife filmmaker Clara Jensen prepared for her next deep-sea shoot. At 34, Clara was already well known for her fearless underwater documentaries. She had spent over a decade exploring oceans across the globe, from the icy depths of Norway to the reefs of Indonesia. Her passion for marine life had started in childhood when her father, a marine photographer, introduced her to the sea's mysteries. Over time, that passion grew into an obsession. She chased moments that most people only saw through a camera lens. And this new project, a streaming documentary on ocean predators, was meant to be her greatest yet. Clara's team had chartered a luxury yacht as their base, equipped with diving gear, cameras, and safety equipment. The day's focus was the tiger shark, one of the ocean's most powerful and unpredictable hunters. She had recorded many species before, but this was different. She wanted to capture the raw, unfiltered movement of the shark without the interference of a cage or enclosure. Her safety diver, a cautious professional named Jonas, was worried about her decision, but Clara was determined. For her, authenticity mattered more than safety. The morning sea was calm, the horizon clear. Clara adjusted her camera rig, a heavy underwater housing fitted with lights and a stabilizer, before slipping into the blue. The water closed over her head, cool and clear, as rays of sunlight filtered down in golden beams. Schools of fish moved like clouds beneath her, scattering with every motion. She descended slowly, steadying her breathing, her eyes scanning the open expanse. Minutes passed quietly before a faint shape appeared below. From the shadow, a massive tiger shark emerged, its body gliding with smooth power. Its striped sides caught the light as it circled, each movement silent and deliberate. Clara held her position, heart racing, yet steady hands framing the creature through her lens. It moved closer, turning just slightly, studying her with dark, unblinking eyes. The shark's approach was graceful but unnerving. It drifted past her, its rough skin brushing lightly against her fin. That single touch created a sudden pull, spinning her slightly and unbalancing her grip on the camera. For a split second, she lost her rhythm. The suction of water around the shark's massive body pulled her downward. Her chest tightened as she tried to regain control, but panic flickered for the first time. The camera slipped from her hands, sinking fast. The metal casing glinted in the filtered sunlight, spinning as it fell. The flash of reflection caught the shark's attention. It turned sharply, drawn by the shimmer, and surged upward in a sudden burst of speed. Clara tried to back away, but the predator was already upon her. Its jaws opened in a blur, clamping briefly onto her thigh before releasing just as quickly. Pain exploded through her leg as she kicked frantically, pushing toward the light above. Blood swirled in the water, thin red trails mixing with bubbles. The shark circled once more but did not follow. Clara reached the surface, gasping, the yacht's deck only meters away. The crew reacted instantly as Clara broke the surface, her face pale and her leg trailing a red trail through the water. Strong hands reached down to pull her aboard, lifting her from the rolling waves onto the deck. She lay trembling, seawater pooling beneath her as one of the divers wrapped a towel tightly around her wound. Her camera was gone, lost somewhere in the deep, but she hardly noticed. All she could feel was the burning pain in her leg and the pounding of her heart against her chest. The ocean around them looked peaceful again, but everyone knew what had just passed beneath it. The yacht's medic moved quickly, disinfecting the wound and binding it firmly, while the captain radioed for medical evacuation. The bite was clean but deep, cutting through the side of her thigh. The shark had released her before crushing bone, a fact that likely saved her life. Clara tried to steady her breathing as the medic checked her pulse and pressure. Around her, the rest of the crew stood in stunned silence. What had begun as a routine shoot had turned into a near tragedy in less than a minute. The support vessel sped toward the nearest port, cutting across the waves with urgency. The water sparkled in the sun, calm and deceptive. Clara stared out at the horizon, her mind looping through what had happened. The turn, the suction, the flash, and the blur of stripes rushing toward her. Every detail burned into her thoughts, each second playing back in slow motion. She had always trusted her instincts underwater, but this time the sea had reminded her how fragile that confidence could be. At the harbor, emergency workers met the boat and rushed her to a nearby hospital. Doctors stitched the deep gash and gave her antibiotics to prevent infection. They said she was lucky. No torn arteries, no permanent muscle loss. Within hours, the pain dulled into a heavy ache, and she finally allowed herself to rest. Her crew waited outside, shaken but relieved that she would recover. For days after the attack, Clara could not stop thinking about the lost camera. The final moments of her dive had been recorded, a priceless piece of footage showing the wild beauty she had risked everything to capture. When a local diver found the heavy housing washed up on a reef several days later, the team recovered it carefully. Inside, the equipment was scratched but functional. The last frame of the video showed the enormous tiger shark drifting past the lens in perfect stillness, its eyes calm and unthreatened. It was a haunting image, a reminder that the creature had simply been following instinct, not anger. Months later, Clara finished the film from her home studio. The documentary became one of the most watched ocean specials of the year. Critics called it breathtaking and fearless, praising the final sequence for its raw honesty. But Clara never entered open water again. She kept her wetsuit folded in a trunk and her camera displayed on a shelf, the recovered lens forever marked with a faint scratch. The sea had given her the most powerful shot of her career, and a memory that stayed with her like a quiet scar. On March 8, 2020, the morning sky above the Atlantic stretched clear and wide as a small cargo plane made its way toward Nassau. On board were 4 passengers: Elena Ruiz, Tom Wallace, Luis Ortega, and Dev Patel. They were a mixed crew sent to deliver emergency supplies after a storm had cut off a chain of islands. Elena, a flight coordinator from Miami, was calm and confident, used to tight schedules and long flights. Tom, the pilot, was an experienced flyer who had spent years navigating the Caribbean's unpredictable skies. Luis, a mechanic, handled maintenance and checks, while Dev, a young assistant, was new to the job and eager to prove himself. The day began smoothly, with calm winds and bright light over the turquoise water. The sea looked peaceful from above, endless and glimmering. But somewhere near mid-flight, just 200 miles off the Bahamas, the calm ended abruptly. A loud shudder tore through the aircraft as an engine failed. Smoke rose from the wing, alarms blared, and the cabin filled with heat. The plane tilted sharply, losing altitude fast. Within moments, Tom guided the craft down as best as he could, the vast blue below rushing closer until the aircraft hit the water with a crushing impact. The plane broke apart, scattering debris across the waves. The 4 survivors managed to escape with a small orange raft and a few emergency supplies. They clung to it, shivering and soaked, watching the wreck sink beneath the waves. Hours passed as the sun climbed higher, turning the sky blinding white. Salt burned their lips and eyes, and the reflection of light off the sea made it hard to look anywhere for long. They shared sips from a small bottle of water, their skin already turning red from exposure. By the second day, silence filled the air, except for the slap of waves against the raft. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. Elena tried to stay calm, organizing what little they had left. A flare gun, one ration pack, and a floating supply bag tied with rope to the side. The others drifted in and out of exhaustion, whispering prayers and watching the horizon. Hope felt distant but not gone. Then came the third morning. The sun rose red, heavy, and distant. As Elena looked over the edge, something moved below. A dark, smooth shape gliding in slow circles. The outline grew sharper as it neared the surface. An oceanic white-tipped shark, its fins cutting the still water like blades. It moved lazily at first, brushing close to the raft. Every few minutes it vanished into the blue, only to reappear from another side. The survivors' hearts pounded as they watched it glide nearer, its eyes fixed and calm. Hours passed. The shark circled again, bumping the raft hard enough to rock it. Each movement felt calculated, patient, and deliberate. Then, as evening light faded, a large wave struck the raft's side, loosening the supply bag. Before anyone could react, Luis reached over to grab it. The next second, the shark lunged upward from below, teeth clamping around his forearm. The sound of the strike broke the silence, water erupting in foam and red streaks as Luis screamed in agony. The ocean around the raft exploded in a storm of motion. Water splashed high, streaked with blood and foam. Luis thrashed wildly as the shark's jaws clamped deep into his arm, the force dragging him half over the edge. Elena and Tom lunged forward, gripping his life vest while Dev held the side of the raft steady. The predator twisted sharply, pulling Luis downward before letting go. He fell back into the raft, gasping, his arm torn and bleeding heavily. The creature sank for a moment, then began circling again, the water rippling with slow, deliberate patterns. Elena pressed her hands against the wound as Tom pulled off his belt to use as a tourniquet. The bleeding slowed slightly, but the air was thick with panic. The shark's shadow kept passing beneath them, each turn closer than before. The orange raft rocked back and forth, every movement echoing through the still air. The smell of blood lingered, mixing with salt and heat, drawing more attention from below. Soon a second fin appeared farther out, gliding parallel to the first. The survivors watched helplessly as the pair circled, their shapes weaving through the fading sunlight like ghosts in the deep. Night came quickly. The sea turned black and endless, the sky above scattered with faint stars. The wind calmed to almost nothing, leaving them adrift in silence, broken only by the faint slap of waves. Luis lay weak in the center of the raft, pale and trembling. Elena wrapped his arm with strips torn from a shirt while Tom kept the flare gun close, ready for any movement. Dev scanned the surface constantly, unable to see where the sharks had gone. Every small splash made them flinch. Hours dragged on. The air grew cold, their skin raw from salt. No one slept. Below them, faint glimmers of bioluminescent plankton drifted in the darkness, glowing softly each time the water stirred. It was beautiful and terrifying at once. Occasionally, a shape passed through the glow. Smooth, fast, silent. The predators never left, circling unseen, their presence a reminder of what waited below. The group huddled closer, whispering prayers, each one fighting exhaustion and fear. At dawn, the horizon began to lighten. The sea looked golden, almost calm again. Luis drifted in and out of consciousness, his pulse weak but steady. They were dehydrated and sunburned, lips cracked, skin burning under the early rays. Then a faint sound reached them, the distant hum of an engine. Elena lifted her head, blinking through the glare, and spotted a small aircraft far above. Tom grabbed the flare gun and fired. A bright red trail streaked upward, then burst into light. The plane turned slightly, dipping its wings in acknowledgement. Minutes later, rescue boats sped toward them, slicing through the waves. The survivors waved frantically, every ounce of strength spent in that motion. The sharks, sensing the approaching noise, began to drift away, vanishing into the open blue. When the rescuers finally reached the raft, the group was trembling, weak but alive. Luis was lifted out first, his arm bound tightly, his eyes barely open. As they were carried onto the deck, Elena turned once more toward the water. The surface looked still again, as if nothing had ever happened. Yet beneath that calm, the ocean held its secrets, vast, patient, and merciless. On July 19, 2018, the morning began with a thick layer of fog rolling across the waters off Cape Cod. The ocean stretched in every direction, soft and gray beneath the low sky. Marine guide Hannah Cross stood near the bow of a small whale-watching vessel. ready to lead a group of 12 tourists, eager to see the marine life that made this area famous. At 29, she had spent years studying ocean behavior and guiding groups through these waters, confident in every current and tide. That morning, though, the sea carried a strange stillness. Even the gulls circling above seemed restless, their cries sharper than usual. The boat moved steadily through calm swells until a foul, heavy scent reached them. The tourists covered their noses as the captain pointed toward a dark mass floating in the distance. Drifting just beyond the inlet was the swollen body of a minke whale. Its pale skin stretched and split in places. Gulls perched across it, tugging at the remains. The smell of salt and decay hung thick in the air. Hannah knew they needed to check it, as debris could damage local boats or lure predators closer to shore. She knelt near the bow, leaning carefully over the edge to free a rope that had tangled around one of the whale's fins. The tourists watched quietly, some taking photos through the mist. The water around the carcass rippled lightly, the surface disturbed by unseen movement below. The fog thinned for a moment, revealing the pale underside of the whale beneath the waves, and then everything changed. From below, the water erupted with sudden force. A massive great white shark lunged upward, bursting from the depths in an explosion of foam and spray. It struck without hesitation, its jaws closing around Hannah's thigh. The impact lifted her clean off the deck, her scream drowned by the sound of crashing water. Blood spread instantly, mixing with the gray sea as the predator dragged her down with terrifying power. Tourists froze in shock. The captain shouted commands and threw lines toward the water, but she had vanished beneath the surface. For a brief moment she reappeared, breaking through the foam, gasping for air. Her arms flailed toward the surface before the sea erupted again. Another violent surge, a swirl of red and bubbles, then silence. The once quiet fog now echoed with cries of panic and disbelief. The captain swung the vessel in tight circles, trying to locate any sign of her. The whale carcass drifted nearby, bobbing with the motion of the waves, its bulk still attracting the circling predator beneath. The smell of blood mixed with the stench of decay, spreading over the deck as tourists wept and clung to one another. When rescue boats arrived minutes later, they searched through debris scattered across the slick water. Floating between gulls and foam, they found her torn life jacket and a single boot drifting near the whale's remains. The sea had already swallowed the rest. The sea around the boat grew still again after the rescue teams left, the fog thickening and swallowing the sounds of engines in the distance. Only the gulls remained, circling and crying over the patch of disturbed water where everything had happened. The tourists sat in silence, pale and trembling, clutching life jackets in each other. The deck was streaked with water and traces of red that the waves slowly washed away. The smell of rot and salt lingered in the air, heavy and sharp. The whale carcass drifted farther out, rocking gently as if nothing had occurred. Hours later, back on shore, the news of the attack spread quickly. Locals gathered near the marina, watching as emergency boats returned with somber faces. Divers searched through the surrounding area until nightfall, but they found only pieces of torn fabric and fragments of equipment. The ocean had claimed everything else. The captain sat motionless on the dock, his head bowed, the fog curling around the lights like smoke. By evening, the coastline grew crowded with reporters and curious onlookers. People whispered in small groups, shocked that something so violent had happened in familiar waters. Fishermen spoke quietly about recent sightings of large predators near the feeding grounds, drawn by whale carcasses that occasionally drifted close to the shore. Experts explained that the decaying whale had likely released strong scents that confused the shark's senses. To the predator, the difference between prey and scavenger was hidden beneath the waves. Over the next few days, the harbor remained quiet. The tour company suspended all trips, and the flags on the boats fluttered weakly in the ocean breeze. The crew of Hannah's vessel gathered to lay flowers at the dock, tying ribbons and shells to the rail where she had once stood. Her family arrived soon after, faces drawn and hollow, staring at the endless horizon that had taken her. For them, the sea that she had loved so much now felt like an enemy, vast, cold, and unforgiving. Local authorities placed warnings around the bay, urging boats to keep their distance from drifting carcasses. Scientists arrived to study the area, mapping patterns of predator behavior. They explained that such accidents were rare but could happen whenever food scents filled the water. The tragedy became a lesson shared across the region, that beauty and danger often lived side by side beneath the surface. Weeks passed, yet the memory of that morning clung to the town. Fishermen returning at dawn would pause and look toward the open sea, imagining the shadow of a fin gliding silently beneath the waves. Visitors to the coast still spoke of the smell that had hung in the air that summer, and of how calm water could turn fierce without warning. A small memorial was built near the harbor, a circle of driftwood, shells, and smooth stones. Carved into one piece of wood were her initials and the year she was lost. Each tide washed over it, softening the edges but never erasing the mark. Locals placed flowers there every season, a quiet reminder of the power of the ocean and the life it both gives and takes. On the night of March 8, 2023, thick fog rolled across the dark waters off the coast of Washington state. The air was cold and heavy with mist as the Coast Guard cutter Sentinel moved steadily through the quiet sea. The 82-foot vessel carried a small crew led by Lieutenant Aaron Blake, a calm and experienced officer who had spent nearly a decade at sea. His team included engineers, navigators, and deckhands, all trained for long patrols in unpredictable weather. For them, this was supposed to be a simple night exercise, checking radar, testing communication systems, and running drills near the coastline. Aaron loved the calm of the ocean at night. The steady hum of the engines and the faint glow from the deck lights always gave him a sense of control and security. But beneath that calm surface, the Pacific was restless. Unknown to the crew, a pod of orcas was following a trail of salmon that had wandered unusually close to shore. These powerful predators were intelligent and territorial, moving silently through the cold water like black and white shadows. Inside the cutter, the crew monitored instruments, unaware that they were being watched from below. The night was quiet except for the steady pulse of the radar and the faint slap of waves against the hull. Suddenly, a loud metallic thud shook the vessel. The crew lurched as the ship tilted slightly to one side. Confusion spread across the deck as another impact came, this time harder, rattling loose equipment and sending a few men sprawling. Out of the fog, a tall dorsal fin appeared, gliding past the side of the ship before vanishing into the darkness. Then came another strike. The hull shuddered, and water splashed across the deck. The orcas had surrounded them, circling with precision and force. The cutter rocked as waves crashed over its bow and alarms began to sound. The radar showed several large shapes moving rapidly around the vessel, coming in close and pulling back again in perfect rhythm. The sailors scrambled to secure equipment, gripping handrails as the ship trembled from repeated hits. One of the orcas rammed the stern with incredible strength, leaving deep marks along the metal. Another nudged the side, causing the cutter to roll sharply in the water. The fog amplified every sound: the crashing waves, the metallic groans, and the pounding of the crew's boots on wet steel. For 30 long minutes, the pod tested the vessel with increasing aggression, circling and striking as if challenging it. The crew braced for each new impact, holding their positions while salt spray and mist drenched their faces. The cold air cut through their uniforms, and every second felt longer than the last. Then, as suddenly as it began, the attack stopped. The shapes beneath the surface drifted away, disappearing into the fog-covered horizon, leaving behind a battered but still standing ship in the dark Pacific. As the sea grew quiet again, the crew stood frozen on the slick metal deck, every breath visible in the cold air. The faint echo of the orca's calls carried through the mist, fading into the distance. Lieutenant Aaron Blake gripped the railing, his hands trembling slightly, scanning the dark surface for any sign of movement. The fog pressed around them like a wall, muffling every sound except the gentle lapping of waves against the damaged hull. The once steady rhythm of their patrol had vanished, replaced by tense silence and disbelief. When the alarms finally stopped, the sailors moved cautiously through the deck, checking for leaks and damage. Deep gouges marked the bow, and several lines hung loose over the edge, frayed and soaked. Metal panels were bent inward where the orcas had struck. The ship had held, but the power behind those hits was clear. Even hardened seamen felt an unease none of them had known before. It was one thing to face storms, another to be targeted by creatures so strong and deliberate. Inside the control room, the equipment still flickered. Some systems had gone offline during the repeated blows. The radar, though still active, showed nothing now, only the calm emptiness of the fog-covered ocean. The pod had disappeared as swiftly as it had come. Aaron ordered checks and assessments, his voice steady though his thoughts raced. He had read about orca encounters before, but never like this. This had not been random curiosity. It had felt like testing, organized, coordinated, almost intelligent in its precision. Hours later, as dawn approached, the fog began to lift. The crew gathered near the bow, staring at the long scars across the steel. Salt water glistened in the grooves, reflecting pale morning light. Their uniforms were damp, their faces drawn from fatigue. None spoke. They all understood how close they had come to real disaster. Had the orcas chosen to strike harder, the outcome might have been far worse. By the time they reached shore, news of the encounter had already spread through the base. Marine specialists later studied the reports and described it as playful aggression, a form of interaction often seen in orcas investigating foreign objects or vessels. To the crew, though, it had felt like a test of survival. In the days that followed, Aaron replayed the night again and again in his mind. The sound of metal bending, the sharp vibration of impact, the eerie calm afterward. The ocean had reminded them that even advanced machinery and human discipline could be humbled by the will of nature. The cutter was repaired, repainted, and soon sent back to patrol. Yet for those who had been aboard that night, the memory stayed vivid. The fog, the fin, the unseen shapes moving in the dark. None would ever forget the feeling of being watched by something far greater than themselves. On July 17, 2025, the sun rose high and bright over the Florida coastline, casting golden light across winding mangrove channels and quiet estuaries. Jason Miller, a 34-year-old outdoor guide known for his love of nature photography, had planned a relaxed morning paddle through the waterways with his friend Riley Chin, a 28-year-old marine biology student. Both shared a passion for exploring hidden corners of the coast, where fish darted beneath overhanging branches and birds glided low across the water. The storms from the week before had left the river swollen and murky, the surface stained brown from churned-up silt and fallen leaves. To them it seemed peaceful, but beneath the calm hid something far more dangerous. Jason had grown up in Florida, spending his childhood kayaking and fishing in the same waters he now explored as an adult. He felt comfortable in the environment, confident in his experience, and in the reliability of his gear. Riley, though newer to kayaking, trusted him completely. That morning they set off early to avoid the afternoon heat, paddling side by side through the narrow channel. The air was thick with humidity, insects buzzing lazily over the surface, and the faint smell of salt drifted inland with the breeze. Their small kayak glided smoothly, slicing through the still water. Jason paused often to take photographs, capturing mangroves, wading birds, and rippling reflections of light. Around them, the forest grew dense, the branches arching overhead like a tunnel. The sounds of splashing fish echoed through the passage, the aftermath of feeding activity from the night before. Neither of them noticed the faint ripples in the distance or the subtle disturbance spreading below the kayak. Jason leaned over to photograph a heron perched on a branch, focusing his camera lens carefully. Beneath him, a large shadow drifted closer, its outline distorted by the muddy water. In a sudden, violent burst, the surface exploded. A massive bull shark surged upward, slamming against the side of the kayak with tremendous force. The fiberglass hull groaned and rocked violently, sending water splashing into their faces. The predator's jaws clamped down on the side of the vessel, its rough skin scraping the paint and leaving deep gouges as it twisted its head from side to side. The kayak tilted sharply, nearly tossing both men into the water. Jason gripped his paddle, heart hammering in his chest, while Riley tried to steady their balance. The shark vanished for a split second before striking again, ramming the bottom of the kayak so hard that the nose lifted out of the water. Foam and spray filled the air. Jason swung his paddle instinctively, striking near the thrashing shadow. The shark snapped again, missing his calf by inches as its body brushed against the hull. Riley's arms trembled as he paddled furiously toward the distant sandbank, the boat swaying with every powerful movement beneath them. The moments stretched endlessly, the sound of splashing and crashing echoing across the narrow river. The predator circled one last time before turning away, its massive tail cutting through the murky current as it disappeared back into the depths. Both men gasped for air, their arms shaking, sweat and water streaming down their faces. The kayak drifted toward the shore, the bite marks carved deep into its side, a reminder of how quickly calm waters can transform into chaos. The kayak scraped softly against the sand as Jason and Riley tumbled out, collapsing onto the wet shore. Their hands dug into the grainy surface, hearts pounding in their chests. The morning sun beat down hard, its warmth mixing with the sting of salt water and sweat on their skin. Both men lay still for a few seconds, trying to catch their breath while the river's surface settled behind them. The only sounds were the gentle lap of water against the bank and the distant call of seabirds. Jason sat up first, his arms trembling from exhaustion. He glanced back toward the river, half expecting the dark fin to appear again. The mangrove channel, now eerily calm, gave no sign of movement. The water that had exploded moments earlier looked peaceful once more, but he knew better than to trust that calmness. Riley's hand shook as he inspected the deep gouges along the kayak side. Fiberglass strands stuck out where the bull shark's teeth had scraped through, leaving the small craft nearly split open. A trail of red streaked one of Jason's legs where a sharp edge had cut through his skin during the chaos. The wound wasn't deep, but it throbbed with pain, a stinging reminder of how close the encounter had come to disaster. They tore strips of fabric from a towel to wrap it, their movements slow and deliberate. Every small sound around them, the splash of a fish or rustle of a branch, made their nerves jolt. Minutes passed before either of them stood again. The once exciting adventure had turned into something raw and humbling. The bright sun reflected off the murky water, and the river seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. Neither spoke. They both knew how lucky they were to be alive. The thought of how fast everything had changed played over in their minds. One moment they were paddling peacefully. The next, they were caught between life and death in a heartbeat. A small fishing boat appeared around the bend, drawn by the echo of the splashing. The two men waved weakly, and the boat turned toward them. When the fishermen reached the shore, they helped drag the damaged kayak onto the sand. The bite marks drew everyone's attention. Deep, wide impressions spaced perfectly to show the strength of the jaws that had attacked. One of the fishermen shook his head, his expression grave, and pointed toward the deeper part of the river. Jason followed the gesture, understanding without a word that this water belonged to something far more powerful than them. After cleaning their wounds and checking their gear, Jason and Riley packed their things silently. The broken kayak was left behind, half buried in the sand as the tide began to rise. When they reached the main road hours later, both turned for one last look at the quiet estuary. The golden sunlight shimmered across the surface, beautiful but deceptive. It hid the truth that beneath those waters lived an unpredictable force, one that moved unseen and struck without warning. Days later, local authorities examined the marks on the kayak and confirmed the attacker had been a large bull shark, likely drawn in by the scent of fish remains from the recent storms. Jason's photographs from earlier that day remained untouched in his camera, frozen reminders of calm moments before chaos. He never deleted them, but he also never returned to those mangrove channels. What had once been a place of beauty had become a haunting memory, a reminder of how fragile safety can be when the wild decides to show its strength.